What if Hagrid was Harry's grandfather, the hidden truth the night Voldemort fell? Hagrid didn't arrive at Godric's Hollow by chance or even by Dumbledore's orders. He came because the house that lay in ruins contained his son. Rubeus Hagrid had fallen in love with a witch named Margaret Evans 50 years earlier. She was small and fierce, with eyes that sparkled when she laughed. But when their son James was born, the wizarding world's prejudice against half-breeds tore them apart. Margaret took James and disappeared, changing their surname to Potter. To hide the giant heritage, she told James his father was dead, a war hero who died fighting dark wizards. Hagrid watched from afar as James grew up. He saw him at Hogwarts, proud and brilliant, never knowing the groundskeeper who smiled so warmly at him was his father. James inherited his mother's smaller stature, but his father's wild hair and fierce loyalty. Hagrid's heart broke every time James walked past without recognition. When James married Lily Evans, Hagrid wept with joy. When Harry was born, Hagrid felt the pull of family blood he'd never experienced. And when Voldemort murdered them both, Hagrid didn't just lose his charges, he lost his son. And Daughter Dash in Dash lured out the rescue that Halloween night. Hagrid pulled baby Harry from the wreckage with trembling hands. This wasn't just the boy who lived, this was his grandson, the last piece of his family. Harry's survival wasn't just love's protection. The ancient giant blood in his veins had made him tougher than any normal child. "Grandfather's here, Hagrid," whispered into the crying baby's ear, a secret he would carry for 11 years. Growing up at Privet Drive, the Dursleys sensed something different about Harry beyond magic. Petunia remembered her sister mentioning James's unusual strength, his ability to shake off injuries that should have hospitalized him. They feared not just a wizard, but something larger and more dangerous lurking in Harry's blood. Harry's unexplained resilience surviving the Whomping Willow, the graveyard encounter. Countless Quidditch falls wasn't just plot armor. Core to giant, blood flowed through his veins, making him naturally more durable. His messy hair wasn't just unruly, it was giant hair trying to grow wild. The secret keeper for 6 years at Hogwarts. Hagrid watched his grandson grow, aching to tell the truth. Every scraped knee he tended, every dangerous creature he introduced Harry to, every fierce defense of the boy, it all came from a grandfather's love disguised as friendship. When Hagrid looked at Harry, he saw James in the boy's face, Margaret in his stubborn streak, and himself in Harry's loyalty to friends. The resemblance was there for anyone who knew to look, the same kind eyes, the same protective instincts, the same willingness to trust even when wisdom suggested otherwise. Hagrid's tears when Harry was presumed dead at the Triwizard tournament. His rage when Harry was accused of opening the Chamber of Secrets. His desperate need to share magical creatures with the boy, it all made sense. This wasn't just a teacher caring for a student. This was a grandfather watching his grandson face dangers that should have killed him. The revelation of truth came out in Harry's 7th year. During the darkest days when Voldemort had returned and hope seemed lost, Hagrid, thinking he might die in the coming battle, couldn't bear the thought of Harry never knowing. "There's something I should have told years ago," Hagrid said, his massive hands shaking as he pulled out a faded photograph. It showed a young woman with kind eyes holding a baby with impossibly messy hair, standing next to a much younger Hagrid. "That's your grandmother, Margaret. And that baby, that's your dad, Harry. James Potter was me son." Harry stared at the photograph, seeing his father's features clearly now, in Hagrid's face the same gentle eyes, the same fierce protectiveness that had always seemed too intense for a simple friendship. "You're my—" Harry couldn't finish the sentence. "Your grandfather, Harry. I've been watching over ye since the day ye were born. Wishing I could tell ye, but knowing it weren't me place. Your dad never knew either. His mum thought it was safer. That way, with all the prejudice against half-breeds, the revelation recontextualized everything." Hagrid's emotional breakdown when Harry was accused of being the heir of Slytherin. His desperate attempts to give Harry magical creature lessons. Trying to share his world with his grandson. The way he'd always seemed to take Harry's dangers personally, as if each threat against the boy was a threat against his own family, because it was. The new understanding zoomed. Harry understood why he'd always felt such a strong connection to magical creatures, why he could see Thestrals, why his Patronus was so powerful. Giant blood carried its own magic, ancient and deep. He understood why Grop had seemed to recognize something in him, why dragons never quite managed to kill him, why he could withstand a Cruciator's curse better than most. He wasn't just Harry Potter, the boy who lived. He was Harry Potter, great-grandson of giants, carrying the strength of both his magical lineage and his giant heritage. The war took on new meaning then. Harry wasn't just fighting for the wizarding world, he was fighting for a family. That included not just his friends, but the grandfather who had loved him from afar for 16 years, never asking for recognition, never demanding acknowledgement, content to simply be present in his grandson's life in whatever way he could. When Harry walked into the Forbidden Forest to face Voldemort, he carried with him the love of parents he'd barely known and the quiet, constant devotion of a grandfather who had watched over him since birth. Giant blood and wizard magic, love and loyalty, all flowing through his veins as he chose to die for the people he loved. And when he came back to life, the first face he wanted to see wasn't Hermione's or Ron's or even Ginny's dot, it was Hagrid's, his grandfather's. Epilogue years later, when Harry's own children played in the grounds of Hogwarts, they called the groundskeeper great-grandfather Hagrid. They knew the story of their heritage, proud of both their wizard and giant blood. And Hagrid, now ancient, even by giant standards, would tell them stories of their grandfather James, their great-grandmother Margaret, and the night their father saved the world with love that ran deeper than magic love. That came from family, chosen in blood, wizard and giant, all woven together into something stronger than any dark magic could break. The secret was finally free, and the family was finally whole. The Untold Moments first year, the weight of secrets when Hagrid first saw 11-year-old Harry. On Diagon Alley, it took every ounce of his self-control not to crush the boy in a bear hug. This was his grandson, so small and thin, wearing clothes that hung off his tiny frame like sacks. The Dursleys had clearly not been feeding him properly, and Hagrid's giant blood boiled with protective rage. "You're a wizard, Harry," he said. But what he wanted to say was, "You're my family, Harry. You're all I have left of my son." Watching Harry's amazement at the magical world broke Hagrid's heart. This should have been James showing his son these wonders. Instead, it was a grandfather who couldn't even reveal who he was, watching his grandson discover his heritage like a stranger. When Harry asked about his parents, Hagrid's tears weren't just for fallen friends, they were for the son he'd lost, the daughter-in-law he'd grown to love from afar, and the grandson who would never know his true family history. The dragon incident when Norbert hatched in Hagrid's hut, Harry's immediate fascination wasn't coincidence. Giant blood called to dragon magic in ways most wizards couldn't understand. Harry felt the pull of ancient magic, the same magic that flowed through giants who had once been dragon friends in the old days. Hagrid watched Harry handle Norbert with natural ease, and nearly gave himself away. "You've got a gift with creatures, Harry," he said, when what he meant was, "You've got your great-great-grandmother's dragon-singing blood in ye." When the dragon burned Ron, Harry's instinct was to put himself between his friend and danger, classic giant protective behavior. Hagrid had to bite his tongue to keep from explaining why Harry's reflexes were so much faster than a normal wizard's. The Philosopher's Stone in the hospital wing. When Harry was recovering from his encounter with Quirrell, Hagrid sat by his bedside every night. Dumbledore allowed it, understanding that Hagrid's vigil was more than friendship, though he didn't know the full truth either. Hagrid would whisper stories about James as a student, careful never to reveal their relationship. "Your dad was brave too, Harry. Reckless like you. Made me heart stop more times than I care to count." What Harry didn't know was that these were a grandfather's memories, watching his son grow up from the shadows, just as he was now watching his grandson. Second year, the accusation, when Harry heard the voice in the walls, Hagrid noticed something. Others missed. Harry tilted his head the same way Grop did when listening to distant sounds. Giant hearing was more acute than wizard hearing, and Harry was picking up frequencies others couldn't detect. The accusation that Hagrid was behind, The Chamber of Secrets attacks hit Harry harder than it should have. For a simple teacher-student relationship, something deep in Harry's blood recognized family under threat, and his desperate defense of Hagrid came from instincts he didn't understand. When Hagrid was taken to Azkaban, his last look was at Harry, not at Dumbledore, not at McGonagall, his grandson, who was standing there confused and hurt, not knowing why this felt like losing family all over again. In Azkaban, Hagrid didn't just suffer from Dementors feeding on his happy memories. They fed on his deepest joy watching Harry grow up, being present for birthdays he couldn't celebrate, Christmas mornings he couldn't share, bedtime stories he couldn't tell. Third year, Buckbeak and blood when Buckbeak attacked Draco. Hagrid's terror wasn't just about his beloved hippogriff. It was about his grandson potentially witnessing an execution, about Harry blaming himself for another death, connected to someone Hagrid loved. The night they saved Buckbeak, Harry's easy communication with the hippogriff wasn't just natural talent. Hippogriffs respected giant blood. They could sense the ancient magic that ran deeper than wizard power. Buckbeak bowed to Harry not just as a wizard, but as someone whose bloodline had once been allied with magical creatures. When Hagrid was reinstated, his joy at seeing Harry again was almost overwhelming. He had to excuse himself to cry in private, remembering how Margaret had looked when she'd first placed baby James in his arms. Fourth year, the tournament terror, the Triwizard tournament, nearly broke Hagrid's resolve to keep his secret. Watching his 14-year-old grandson face dragons and dark magic, knowing Harry was doing it with quarter-giant blood that made him both stronger and more vulnerable, was torture. When Harry faced the Hungarian Horntail, Hagrid couldn't watch. He stood behind the stands, hands over his face, feeling every scratch and burn through the bond of family blood. Dragons recognized giant heritage. The Horntail's attacks were more vicious, because she sensed the ancient rivalry between their kinds. The night Harry's name came out of the goblet of fire, Hagrid sat outside his hut all night, wrestling with whether to reveal the truth. His grandson was in mortal danger, and Hagrid had information that might help. Giant blood made Harry more resilient, but also more attractive to dark magic as a target. The graveyard. When Harry returned from the graveyard, traumatized and babbling about Voldemort's return, Hagrid was the first to believe him completely. Not because of evidence, but because family blood called to family blood. Hagrid could sense the dark magic that had touched his grandson, could smell the death and pain that clung to Harry like smoke. That night, Hagrid broke into the hospital wing and sat beside Harry's bed, holding vigil like he had when Harry was a baby recovering from Voldemort's first attack. He whispered the same protective charms his own giant grandmother had taught him, weaving them around Harry's sleeping form. Fifth year, Grop and recognition. When Hagrid brought Grop to the Forbidden Forest, the giant's reaction to Harry was immediate and startling. Giants could sense family blood through generations, and Grop kept trying to touch Harry, making gentle rumbling sounds that meant little brother in the old giant tongue. Hagrid had to physically restrain Grop from picking Harry up, claiming the giant was just being friendly. But Harry felt the recognition to something in his blood responded to Grop's presence, a sense of belonging he'd never experienced before. "He likes you," Hagrid said. But what he meant was, "He knows your family." The Department of Mysteries. When Harry's scar pain increased throughout fifth year, Hagrid noticed something others missed. Harry's eyes were getting darker, more like giant eyes when they sensed danger. The connection to Voldemort was affecting not just Harry's wizard magic, but his giant heritage as well. The night Harry saw Arthur Weasley attacked through Nagini's eyes, Hagrid felt it to a stabbing pain in his chest that woke him from sleep. Family blood carried psychic connections that most wizards didn't understand, and Harry's pain was becoming Hagrid's pain. Sixth year, the Horcrux truth. When Dumbledore began showing Harry memories of Tom Riddle, Hagrid was quietly doing research of his own. Giants had their own oral histories about dark magic, stories about wizards who split their souls and the prices they paid. He wanted to tell Harry what giant law said about soul magic, that it was particularly vulnerable to pure blood, to love that ran deeper than individual life. Harry's mixed heritage might be exactly what was needed to destroy something as unnatural as a Horcrux, but the secret held him silent, even as he watched his grandson prepare for a battle that might kill him. The forest again the night Harry walked into the Forbidden Forest to die. Hagrid felt him coming. The bond of blood, the connection that had let him find baby Harry in the ruins of Godric's Hollow, pulled at him like a physical rope. When Voldemort's killing curse hit Harry, Hagrid felt his grandson die, a tearing sensation in his chest like his heart was being ripped out. For those few minutes when Harry lay still, Hagrid experienced the same devastating loss he'd felt when James and Lily died. Carrying Harry's body back to Hogwarts was the hardest thing Hagrid had ever done. This was his grandson, his last family, and he was delivering the boy's corpse to the people who had sent him to die. When Harry stirred in his arms, when those green eyes opened and looked up at him with recognition and love, Hagrid nearly dropped him in shock and relief. His grandson was alive and nothing else mattered. After the battle in the Great Hall, as they mourned the dead and celebrated victory, Hagrid couldn't stop looking at Harry. His grandson had done it, had saved them all with the same fierce love that had once driven James to sacrifice himself for his family. When Harry caught him staring, Hagrid just nodded and smiled, tears streaming down his face. Soon, he promised himself. Soon he would tell Harry the truth, and they could finally be the family they were meant to be. The revelation continued when Hagrid finally revealed the truth. The conversation lasted through the night. Harry had so many questions about his father's childhood, about his grandmother Margaret, about the giant heritage he'd never known he carried. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Harry asked, though without anger. He understood secrecy now, understood the weight of protecting people you loved. "I wanted her," Hagrid said, voice thick with emotion. "Every day for 16 years, I wanted to tell ye. But I thought ye deserved to have your own life, without carrying the burden of me mistakes." Harry reached across the table and took his grandfather's massive hand in both of his own. "You were never a mistake, Hagrid, and neither was loving us. The new Future Earth revelation changed everything and nothing." Harry still loved Hagrid exactly as much as before, but now that love had a foundation, a blood-deep connection that explained why they'd always understood each other. Hermione and Ron took the news with their usual loyalty, though Hermione immediately began researching giant heritage and its effects on wizard magic. Ron just shrugged and said, "Explains why you're so bloody hard to kill." The Weasleys welcomed Hagrid into their extended family with typical warmth. Mrs. Weasley immediately began knitting him sweaters and scolding him for not eating properly. Mr. Weasley was fascinated by the magical implications of mixed giant wizard heritage. When Harry married Ginny, Hagrid walked him down the aisle. When their children were born, Hagrid was the first to hold them after their parents, whispering the same protective charms he'd once whispered over baby Harry. James Sirius Potter's first word was Grop, not because he'd met his great-great-uncle, but because giant names carried power in family blood, and the baby recognized the magic that flowed through his own veins. Albus Severus showed signs of giant heritage early in usual strength, an affinity for magical creatures and eyes that turned darker when he was upset. Lily Luna inherited her great-grandmother Margaret's gift for understanding creature languages. The Potter family grew to include not just wizard traditions, but giant ones as well. Stories told in rumbling voices around massive fires, protection charms that predated Hogwarts, and an understanding of magic that went deeper than wands and spells. And through it all, Hagrid watched his family grow with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had waited decades to openly love the people who meant everything to him. The secret was finally free, and the healing could finally begin.